Dallas, I heard that you may be able to obtain, or a veteran may be able to obtain, additional monthly compensation, disability compensation, if they need the assistance of a caregiver to perform activities of daily living. Number one, is that true? And number two, does a caregiver need to be anybody in particular, like a nurse or a medical professional?
Right. So it is true. Veterans can receive additional compensation if they require regular need for aid and attendance based on their service-connected disabilities. And it's not true that they have to be a professional, a medical professional, a nurse. They don't need any qualifications at all whatsoever.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Be your spouse, an adult child, sibling, friend, complete stranger,
Yep.
if you're comfortable with that. But no, you do not need to have any certifications to provide A&A.
Yeah, and the benefit we're talking about here is, I know you mentioned it, but special monthly compensation at the L rate.
Yes, L.
And that provides, as we said, additional monthly compensation for veterans who need that extra care.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a number of different, very technical regulatory aspects or criteria that a veteran needs to meet in order to, qualify essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I think, as you mentioned, it doesn't matter who the person is that helps, but the type of disability is causing the need for help with activities of daily living matters a lot. So, for example, I've seen plenty of cases where a veteran will have service-connected disabilities that are pretty significant, but they'll also have a very significant non-service-connected disability.
Right.
And unfortunately, that non-service-connected disability is, at least maybe in VA's mind, the primary reason why they need the assistance with activities of daily living.
Right. But that might not mean the end of trying for
Right.
A&A. VA should just look at the service-connected disabilities. If there's clear evidence that these service-connected disabilities are causing that regular need of another person, it should result in a grant. But like you said, a non-service connected disability
It throws a wrench into it.
It might distract VA a bit.
It does, yes.
But it doesn't mean that they can't achieve it. If you're looking to file for A&A, you're going to want to use the VA form 21-2680.
Yep.
Now, this actually does need to be completed by a medical professional. So you could simply ask your primary care physician, doctor, psychiatrist, if you're seeing one, depending on what conditions are needing this care. And then you can send it to VA and VA will establish a claim for it. I have not always had luck with my clients trying to work on that form, and it's totally fine. We can still work around it, get VA to adjudicate the claim in other ways, most notably by raising it, as we say, with an increased rating claim. VA should attach it if that increased rating claim is one of the conditions that necessitates aid and attendance.
Right. Yeah, because at its core, the claim, as we're calling it, for aid and attendance is really kind of inherently part of a claim for an increased rating or an appeal for an increased rating of that underlying disability.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bunch of case law on this, but essentially VA is required under law to, when they're evaluating the severity of a condition, also consider whether that condition causes a need for aid and attendance, as we're talking about. So, part of what we do here is making sure we hold the VA to account and make sure that they follow the law, which involves them looking thoroughly through the file to review whether those service-connected conditions do exhibit any, symptoms that would require the veteran to have, the need for assistance from perhaps a spouse with dressing and undressing and eating or feeding, bathing, things like that, medication management, which actually I think brings us to a good point. The aid and assistance that's needed is for kind of defined areas, right? It's not for anything under the sun. A lot of times we have veterans who come to us saying that they need a spouse to help them, drive back and forth to different places.
Yard work.
Other instances that fall outside the specific criteria set forth in the regulation.
Yeah.
And the regulation is fairly specific, things that we were just talking about, needing assistance with dressing, undressing, bathing, feeding oneself. Those are things that qualify under the regulation. I have also seen cases where some of the best evidence that either the veteran can submit or us as representatives can submit to help establish a claim for SMC aid and attendance is just lay evidence.
Right. One of my favorite things to do for an ANA case is to actually talk with that caregiver, see what does the everyday look like, and that really helps inform, is this regular? Is this aid and attendance? And it helps create great development, great evidence for the case.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, who better than to speak to the type of care that's being given than the caregiver themselves?
Absolutely. Yep.
So a lot of times we'll submit a statement from the veteran, the caregiver. Hopefully those statements align. And then, if you're able to submit an independent medical examination report that, goes through all the different service-connected disabilities and shows how those conditions really do, from a medical standpoint, warrant the caregiving that's being provided, that's excellent evidence.
Yeah, it can help take the case just a step further, but a lot of times too, when I've asked if a client could obtain a 212680, they'll let me know that, their primary care physician is going to charge them for an additional appointment. Yeah. And at that point, I'm just like, let's move on.
There are other ways to win the case.
Yeah, we don't need to be doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, one thing that you mentioned earlier was just the need for regular aid and attendance, as opposed to maybe occasional.
Yep. It's not really defined super well.
It's not at all, actually.
But that's why we weigh the evidence a lot. I'll sometimes have a case and I'll ask you to weigh in, help me out. Does this seem regular enough? Sometimes it's a feeling.
Yep.
And sometimes it takes a little bit more than talking to the client or the caregiver. I'm going to look through the medical records for that client too. Look at the VA exams, because they can have some good evidence in there already that might help me weigh whether or not that's regular.
Yeah. And sometimes, frankly, it comes down to the adjudicator that you're before.
That's true too. Yeah.
And what could be perceived as regular to somebody could be occasional to another. That's why appeals are a thing that can be done and should be done. And, the more you build your case through lay evidence, medical evidence, the stronger your case will be and the higher likelihood of getting a grant in this area.
Yeah.